We're picking up the story that we've been telling for a few weeks now. We've got a few weeks left to go. And we're at the part of the book of Genesis that anybody that said, I'm going to read the Bible cover to cover, anybody here ever said those words? Like, I'm going to sit down and read the Bible cover to cover. You sit down. Most people make it about this far into the book of Genesis before they put it aside and go, I have no idea what's going on anymore. There's a book from 1994. It's by the comedian Paul Reiser. Paul Reiser writes this book, Couplehood. Many of you may remember him from Mad About You. The beginning of that book has an author's warning. This is one of my favorite bits of writing. This is how it begins. You will notice in just a second that this book actually begins on page 145. Don't be alarmed. This is not a mistake. Don't try to get your money back. You didn't miss anything. It's just that I know that when I'm reading, I love being smack in the middle of the book. Pages behind me, pages ahead of me. It's too overwhelming to know that there's just so much left to read and you're only on page 8. This way, you can read the book for 2 minutes, and if anybody asks you how far along you are, you can say, I'm on page 151. And it's really flying. It's sailing, baby. And you'll feel like you're accomplishing something. And I get credit for writing a longer book. Everybody wins, and it costs us nothing. Page 1 is page 148. Brave souls who try to read the Bible should take heart here. Today I have the unenviable task, thanks to Matt who's put us up to this point, to give you the book of Genesis from chapter 12 through 22. It's the story of Abraham. We're going to start with the characters that we meet along the way. Here's, in order of appearance, the characters we have to discuss today. God. Abram, also known as Abraham, who is a country-loving man who lives in the land of Canaan. Sarai, otherwise known as Sarah, who is his wife. Lot, a friend of Abram's, who's a city-slicker version of Abram, and we'll notice that. Lot's wife, who doesn't get one name, she doesn't get 2 names, she gets 0 names. I like to call her Veruca, but we'll get to that in a moment. There's a whole other crew of unpronounceable extras who are more scenery than characters. Think of these as supernumeraries who just kind of fill the stage with a bunch of clatter. Hagar, Sarah's slave. Ishmael, Hagar's son. Isaac, his younger brother. A trio of angels, an unruly mob. Lot and Mrs. Lot's 2 daughters, also unnamed. We don't know why Lot's family doesn't get remembered this way. Moab, who is Lot's son and also his grandson, fun. And Benami, Lot's other son, also Lot's grandson. And then a genealogy that will be remembered by the gospel writers, Matthew and Luke, when it comes time to introducing Jesus, son of Adam, son of God. These characters, what do you know about them? What do you think you know about them? Lynn? Lynn knows that there's the division and the beginning of the break in the family tree because of Ishmael and Isaac and their mothers. What else do we know about any of these characters? Winnie. Lot's wife becomes a pillar of salt. That's why I call her Veruca. I think she's, in the salt family, if you know your Willy Wonka. Who else? What else do we know about these folks? What do you know about Abram? Did you know his name was Abram? And you know his name is also Abraham? Do you know why? God changed him. God changed the name. This is not a test of how much you've gone to Sunday school. This is really just putting it all out here right now so that we can all get this family tree, because the book of Genesis is nothing if it's not the first family Thanksgiving tale of, do you remember your Uncle Moab? And how crazy that Roab character was. And do you remember King, I don't even know how to pronounce the name. They're all here. This is where we're starting to get the family tree. And it's also noticeable that this is the second chance. This is after the flood. All of creation has already been destroyed, and this is God's second chance at making a covenant with God's people. And God does this with this character, Abram. Abram is a good and faithful man. He's a rich man. He escapes Pharaoh, he escapes Egypt, and he has a huge herd of cattle and sheep and birds. He plants things. He loves living in a tent. He's a nomadic character. His friend Lot is equally as rich, but Lot chooses to live in a city, not in a tent. And these two stories parallel. You might know a little bit about Lot and the city where he chose to live. Anybody remember Lot's hometown? Sodom. Sodom and or Gomorrah. He, had a pied a terre. Lot likes living in cities and has a slightly different ethos than Abraham does, but Lot doesn't ever get renamed. And the covenant is made with Abram. The character of God is really what all of this story is about at this point. This is about who God is, how God reveals God's, and the promises that God makes to God's people. Here's how it begins. There once was a man named Abram, and he took his wife Sarai, and he went out to the fields. And he was prosperous. And the Lord blessed him, but did not bless him with children. And it was in his 10th decade of life when Abram finally says, "O Lord, of all these riches, who will I give them to? Where will they go when I die? You have given me no children." This is a good question, right? What of it all? It's a question maybe some of you have asked. Some of you have children and know where your riches will go. Others of you are doing estate planning. Others of you may wonder, what of this place? What are the riches of this sanctuary, of this church? When we are no longer here, what are we stewarding it for? These are human questions. Abram asks them of God, and God says, don't worry about it yet. Kill me some sheep, and I might give you an answer. Humans ask God lots of questions. Abraham asked God lots of questions. And God's answer throughout these 13 chapters is one that begins with, kill me some sheep, and I'll reveal myself to you. Now, let's take a little sidebar to the killing of sheep. In Old Testament language, in the ancient Near East world, there are these things called vassal treaties. Vassal treaties are how kings of the ancient Near East would make covenants with one another. And they exist in the Old Testament. They exist here. And it exists by splitting a sacrificial animal, bird, dove, sheep, and walking through the bloody bits. This is gory, but it's real. Kings would do this. It demonstrates their ability, their stomach, their ability to do this, and by walking through the broken bits, you form a promise. This is in the book of Genesis as well. God says to Abraham, do this, split the sacrificial animal, you will walk through it, and together we will have a new covenant. There's a lot of blood in these 13 chapters. There's blood not just of animals, but there's human blood too. Most notably, there's a lot of human male blood. Because if you think walking through an animal is a gory way to make a promise to someone, imagine when God shows up and says, mutilate your body and the bodies of all of the male folk that you know, and then I will know that you love me. This is a big ask, right? Like, this is a big ask. It's also a bodily altercation that has no precedent. There's no reason for the male body to be changed and circumcised in the way that God demands, but God does demand it. And one question certainly is, Well, what was so wrong with the male body that you created on day 6 at the beginning of the story that you said was good and perfect? Why am I changing it now? Why is there so many chapters devoted to this bit of the story? But there are. Chapters 13, 14, 15, and then the heirs in 22 are talked about again. Circumcision is a way that God's people can prove covenant with God. Abraham does this, and Abraham goes so far as to taking his second son, Isaac, to a mountain one day, and offering even Isaac to God before a sheep appears. Covenant is the language of these chapters. Promises are the language of these chapters. All these characters that we encounter here are the characters that are told that they have to have a promise with God, and God always gives the instruction for how to do it. The thing is, God doesn't ask for any input in what this promise is. So the idea that, like, you will be mine and I will be yours if you do this, but there's no consent from the human side, right? There's no, any ideas for how we might do this? There's no turning to your spouse and saying, hey, what do you think about this and how are we going to do this? That's not this God. This God says, I will be yours and you will be mine when you do this. We start getting the instructions. And this is where most of us lose the plot. Most of us do not like getting told, you will do this and this only if you want me to love you. We don't think of love that way anymore, do we? We think of love as something much more mutual, something that involves consent, continued conversation, even negotiation, even with our children. We all negotiate. God doesn't. And remember that at this point in the story, God has already lost their temper to such a degree that the entire world was flooded and destroyed, except for one ship worth of creation. There's a temperature of God's mood that is beginning to shift here. It's almost as if God is saying, I cannot destroy the world again in a flood the way that I did before. I kind of want to, but I told you I wouldn't, and I put a rainbow in the sky, and so I'm going to make you make all these other promises. Promises that we're going to fail at for generations and generations and generations to come. And it gets to the point where old Abram is out in his tent, and he doesn't know what to do anymore. And he can't produce a child. And his wife is also in her 90s and well beyond childbearing years. And so God says, I'll give you a child through another woman, through a slave. A woman enslaved by his wife as a handmaiden bears Abram's first son, Ishmael, the father of what we would now call another Abrahamic faith. We would call the father of Islam. He's rejected by his stepmother, of course, and a second child is born, Isaac. This brotherly tale is one that gets repeated again and again throughout Scripture. Jacob and Esau, whose birthright? The Gospels themselves do not allow for any siblings of Jesus, lest we have any division in Christianity itself. We know that Jesus has brothers and sisters. They're mentioned. We never get their names. We don't get how many of them. There's never any threat. If you look at the whole of Christianity, this is why priests are celibate. This is why there are no heirs to the Roman Catholic Church, lest the inheritance gets split all the way back to Isaac and Ishmael. When you look at these 13 chapters, you start getting the sense of just how much our history is the same story told again and again and again. And the story could be God is ruthless and vindictive and overly demanding and requires too much and requires sacrifice and doesn't even allow for the forgiveness of a woman turning back to look at her homeland for one last time before getting turned into a pillar of salt. That could be a way to look at it. The other way of looking at it could be God at God's wit's end at this point. For so far have we gone that God is like, I really don't know what to do with you people anymore. And I'm going to stop asking for your opinion. This is the moment with the toddler that you're not negotiating with anymore. This is the moment that says, I'm just going to tell you how this is going to go, and it's going to get better. You're not going to think so, but it's going to get better. And God does this. And God does this with Abram. And when Abram starts listening, God renames Abram. This is what I just told us. Abram is renamed Abraham. And when Sarai starts listening, Sarah gets renamed as well. She gets baptized in some language. Renamed or rechristened might be a word that we would think about. We wouldn't think about it in this time, but we might think about it now. Sarai becomes Sarah by God's own choosing. Abram becomes Abraham by God's own choosing. Isaac becomes the heir by God's own choosing. People become gods by God's own choosing. These words: I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. This is God the Father. This is God the Father who creates all of us, not as the gentle, loving parent that we like to think of God as about, but as a rather strict disciplinarian, someone who pulls us in when we go astray and who says, you're still going to be mine. And it's hard. And if you want to find the difficulty in Scripture, go to these 13 chapters. Go to the Abram stories and find again and again covenant and promise. I can't do 13 chapters in a more concise version than what I've just done. I've tried all week. We haven't talked about everything that's in here. And we haven't even talked about the structure of how this plays out. These 13 chapters are woven together. You get a story of Abraham, you get a story of Lot, you get another story of Abram. You get a story of a genealogy, you get Hagar, and you get Abram again, then you get Isaac. The Bible is going back and forth in on itself in a way that we all tell our stories. It doesn't make linear sense. It tries, but it doesn't. And somewhere in this is our story and what we do and why we're all here. Think to yourself right now about some of the promises you've made to yourself. Maybe you call them New Year's resolutions. Think of the promises you've made to others. Maybe you call them your children or your spouse or your friend. Think of the promises you have made to God. Think of the pleading at 3 a.m. when you're awake and can't sleep. I would do anything. What are the promises that have been prayers of forgiveness or asking for forgiveness? What are the promises that have been gratitude? What are the promises of joy? What are your hopes? And how do you hold them? You're sitting in pews that are 130 years old, and they've held many people before you. And they will hold many, many people after you. And they're stiff, and they're uncomfortable. And if you're my height, whenever I have to sit in them, I realize they're not the right size for me anymore. These are not current human-sized pews. There's something about God that is stiff and uncomfortable, and has held us for generations before, and that will hold us for generations still to come. We've been looking at sample pew cushions, wondering whether or not to replace these pew cushions that you're sitting on. We have no such problem with them, but our friends, our Latter-day Saint friends, have real problems with them. They're not Protestants. They don't like being uncomfortable in church. we're not going to change the pew cushions. We're going to tell everybody to suck it up a little bit more, and you're going to be uncomfortable for a moment, but don't worry, we'll stand up soon. These pews, this building, this anchor is a promise. Sitting next to you in your pew today is a promise, whether or not you know the person or not, is a promise. Showing up at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning on a beautiful day when there are many other things to do is a promise. Going forth from this place and being willing to be changed by being in this place is a promise. Faith is a promise. Faith is the belief in something that cannot be seen, that cannot be proven, but that is known. Here. In that place in our belly that sometimes gets ripped open from excruciating pain, and the only way through is through. And so we walk through those broken bits, and God looks upon us and promises again and again to make us whole and to make us a people when once we were no people, and to call us by a name that is still coming into being, and to change us. And if you want proof of the unprovable, then look no farther than our father Abraham and his many sons. For many sons had Father Abraham, and daughters too.